A poor woman falls in love with a beggar, unaware that he is in fact a billionaire. What happened when he took her to his real life will shock you. Megan Thompson's story begins like so many others, struggling day by day with relentless challenges. She has nothing but a hard job and a fragile hope of improving her life. But every day, she walks through a park where a homeless man, known only as Jack, watches her. He seems to be just another part of the city's landscape, invisible to everyone except her. Something in his eyes, something in his expression, makes Megan see him differently. What she doesn't know is that the man she thinks is invisible holds a secret that will turn her life upside down. Jack starts showing up every day, always in the same park, always with a distant look, lost in his own thoughts. Megan begins to approach him, bringing food, offering conversation, trying to understand who this man is who, unlike the others, asks for nothing but seems to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. Over time, she falls for his calmness, the wisdom in his words, and the mystery that surrounds him. But everything changes in an unexpected way. Jack disappears, without warning, without explanation. Megan, confused and worried, spends days searching for him, trying to understand what happened. Then, in a bizarre twist of fate, Jack reappears, but now in a luxury car, dressed in a sharp suit, exuding power. The truth he's been hiding, a truth Megan could never have imagined, is about to be revealed. He's not the beggar she once knew. He is Elias Ward, one of the richest men in the country, a billionaire who fled his luxurious life in search of something more real. And now, Megan must decide whether the love she feels for him is stronger than the lie he built around himself. Before we dive back into this touching story, help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a moment. Now, let's continue the story. Megan Thompson didn't know what rest meant. Her life, as long as she could remember, had always been a daily battle. She grew up in a modest neighborhood where people fought for a chance, where dreams were put on hold in the name of survival. Her job at the corner cafe, with its long hours and tight pay, was all she had. But she never let it get her down. Megan was a woman of faith, a woman of courage. She didn't have much, but she knew that her determination would be the thing that pulled her out of the cycle. She believed that one day something would change, that her life could be different. And then he appeared. Every day Megan passed by the park on her way to work. It was the only path she knew, the only one that led her straight to the cafe where she worked. She always noticed the same figures: the newspaper vendor, the lady selling flowers, the man singing old songs at the corner. But one day, something strange happened. Megan saw a man who seemed to be there for the first time, sitting on a wooden bench with his head down, tattered clothes, and a distant look. He was dirty, his hair messy, his beard unkempt. But there was something about that man that made her stop for a moment and watch. He wasn't like the others. The man didn't ask for anything. He was simply there, watching life pass by, as if he didn't care about the world around him. Megan felt something peculiar, a strange sense of connection, as if he were someone important, someone in search of something, but who, somehow, hadn't yet found it. She looked at him for a few seconds, undecided about what to do. The man seemed not to notice her presence. She then continued on her way, but couldn't forget the feeling he had left behind. The next day, he was there again, on the same bench, in the same position. Megan walked past him, and this time something inside her made her stop. Not knowing exactly why, she bought a coffee and sat next to him. She watched him in silence, trying to understand what was behind that empty gaze. For a moment she thought he might just be another homeless person, someone who had lost everything and had nothing left. But there was something more, something that made her want to know more about him. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know this man, didn't know anything about him, but she felt an inexplicable need to speak. "Hey, are you okay?" she asked hesitantly, unsure if he would respond. The man looked at her, surprised, but without showing any irritation. His eyes were deep, as if carrying untold stories. "Yeah," he answered, his voice low and soft. I'm just watching. Megan smiled, unsure of what to say next, and extended the coffee to him. I brought a coffee if you want. It's the least I can do. The man looked at the coffee, and for a moment Megan thought he would hesitate. But instead, he took the cup and thanked her. Do you have anything else to offer besides coffee? He asked, looking into her eyes with a slight smile. Megan laughed, not knowing whether he was joking or being serious. Maybe, she replied, smiling back. And from that moment on, something inexplicable happened. She felt like she had found a piece of her soul in that man. He wasn't just another beggar on the street. There was something about him that intrigued her deeply. Something in his gaze, in his posture. How he seemed so calm and yet so distant from everything around him, as if he were in another world, completely disconnected from his reality. It was impossible not to wonder what brought him to that park every day. In the following days, Megan returned to the park, and when she found the man again, she started offering him something more. A piece of bread, a smile, a conversation. She began to learn his routine, his habits, his gestures. He never spoke much about himself, but he spoke a lot about the world. He talked about the simple things, about the value of life, about how people went through everything without noticing the truly important things. He had a worldview that made her reflect on her own life. He didn't have money, he didn't have luxury, but his wisdom seemed priceless. He never asked for anything. He was just there, watching, as if waiting for something. And Megan, little by little, began to open up to him. They talked about her work, about how she dreamed of having a different life, about how she wanted to escape from that tight routine and have something more, something that would make her feel that her life had a purpose. She spoke, and he listened. He never judged, never criticized. He just listened, as if her words had meaning. Megan felt that her connection with Jack, or rather, with that nameless man, was growing stronger each day. She wondered what he thought about her if he saw her the same way, but he never said anything. He just kept sitting there, silent, with his mysterious eyes that seemed to hide a universe of stories. What she didn't know was that this man, this mysterious beggar, was about to change her life forever. In the days that followed, Megan found herself returning to the park almost without realizing what was happening. Jack, the mysterious man, seemed to have become part of her routine. He was no longer just a beggar on the street, someone she saw every now and then. No, he had become something more. Someone who, inexplicably, had infiltrated her thoughts. Someone whose words and gestures made her reflect on the world and herself in ways she never imagined. Over the weeks, the frequency of their conversations increased. Megan began to realize that Jack wasn't just a homeless man, but someone who carried a deep wisdom. He didn't make complicated speeches or try to impress her with what he knew. On the contrary, his words were simple, but full of truth. He talked about life, about how people get lost in the small things, and how rarely they stop to notice what really matters. Each conversation with Jack made her reflect on her own daily life and, without her realizing it, he was transforming her. He told her stories about the world out there, about the people he had met, about life on the streets, and about how appearances can deceive. Megan, with her simple job and routine without much happening, found herself fascinated. She spent her days longing for more moments like those, eager for more conversations that made her see the world in a new light. But what she didn't expect was that those meetings would start to have a deeper effect on her. Megan had always had a dream: to break free from the routine, to have a better life, to find something that would give her a sense of fulfillment. She had always believed that she could find a way to improve her life, but over time, the challenges began to weigh more heavily on her. Each day, it felt like life was giving her more obstacles than opportunities. The cafe where she worked consumed her, and the pressure of unpaid bills left her restless. But during the hours she spent with Jack, something changed. That feeling of emptiness that haunted her seemed to lessen. He made her forget the difficulties, even if just for a little while. Megan began to realize that she cared more for Jack than she would like to admit. It wasn't something she had planned. It wasn't love at first sight. It was something subtler, something that had grown over time, without her even noticing. There was something about him that drew her in, something she couldn't explain. He was different from everything she had ever known. He didn't have the arrogance of some people she met at work, nor the high expectations that others had of her. He accepted her as she was. He listened to her without judgment. Sometimes when Jack looked at her with those deep eyes, Megan wondered what he saw in her. He seemed so calm, so at peace with his life, despite the circumstances he was in. He wasn't like the other men she knew, those who always wanted something in return. He didn't seem to care about what she had or didn't have. He was there, offering his company, and she began to realize that somehow he needed her too. Although Megan never questioned much about Jack's past, she started to feel that there was more to his story. He spoke little about himself, but sometimes in the middle of their conversations, a distant look would appear on his face, as if he were stuck in something he couldn't or didn't want to reveal. Megan knew that Jack had a secret, but she didn't know what it was. She respected his space and never pressured him to share more. She believed that, when he was ready, he would speak. But at the same time, she couldn't help but wonder what was behind that man. There were so many layers left uncovered, so many stories he seemed to be hiding. Their relationship slowly evolved. Megan began to feel a kind of emotional dependence on Jack, a connection that went beyond friendship. She didn't know how it happened, but in their conversations she felt that he understood her in a unique way. When she talked about the challenges she faced at work, about the dreams she had of one day improving her life, Jack listened to her with genuine attention. He didn't offer easy solutions or superficial words of comfort. Instead, he just listened to her, and that made her feel valued in a way that no one else seemed to make her feel. He began to give her subtle advice, but advice that made her question her life choices. "Sometimes, Megan," he said once, "the simplest things have the most value. People get lost chasing greatness, but they forget that true greatness is in the little things." Megan looked at him confused and asked, "What do you mean?" Jack smiled softly. "Beauty is in the simple things, in what we can't touch, in what we can't see. But you'll only realize that when you stop chasing something that doesn't exist." These words stayed with her. She carried them home every night, reflecting on them as she prepared to sleep. As the days went by, she found herself more and more involved with Jack. It wasn't an overwhelming love, but a silent bond, an emotional exchange that she no longer knew how to control. She felt that he needed her in a way she had never felt with anyone before, and that touched her deeply. Jack, the homeless man, was teaching her more about life than anyone ever could, and unknowingly, she was beginning to fall in love with him, a little more each day. Megan never imagined this could happen. The park, which had once been the setting for their peaceful conversations and moments of reflection, now seemed empty, unrecognizable. She was used to passing by it every morning and always finding him sitting on the same bench, eyes fixed on the horizon as if he were waiting for something, or someone. But that day, something was different. Jack wasn't there. She stopped in front of the empty bench, feeling a sense of emptiness that took her by surprise. She looked around searching for him, but he was nowhere to be found. Her heart began to race, a strange and inexplicable feeling overtaking her chest. Maybe he had gone somewhere for something. Maybe he was just somewhere else. But a voice inside her head told her that something wasn't right. In the following days, the situation worsened. Megan, accustomed to her daily routine, now found herself stopping every time she passed by the park, her eyes anxiously searching for Jack. But he was never there. She began to worry, but didn't know exactly what to do. Her mind tried to convince her that he would return, that it was just a phase, a small break in his life as a beggar. But as the days passed and Jack gave no sign of life, Megan's anxiety only grew. She tried to convince herself that there must be a simple reason for him to have left. But what bothered her wasn't his absence in itself, but the fact that she didn't know what was going on. Jack had always been so unpredictable, someone who would show up and disappear like a ghost, but his absence made her feel like something was out of place. She tried unsuccessfully to hide the growing anguish that was consuming her. Each day without Jack was harder than the last. Megan began doing something she never imagined she would. She started looking for him. The afternoons she used to spend in her routine now became filled with desperate searches for him. She walked the streets, asking other homeless people, local shopkeepers, but no one seemed to know anything. It was as if Jack had simply disappeared off the map, as if he had never existed. Why had he disappeared? What had happened to him? Megan couldn't understand. They had become so close she trusted him in a way she never imagined she could trust anyone. She wondered if he was in danger, if something bad had happened to him. Her mind would travel to the worst possible scenarios, but she couldn't help but hope that at some point Jack would reappear, with that calm smile and mysterious gaze as if nothing had happened. The search for Jack became an obsession. Megan began to get distracted at work, her eyes fixed on the street, hoping to see a familiar figure approaching. Conversations with her coworkers became superficial, and she barely paid attention to what they were saying. Her mind was elsewhere. Jack had become the only thing she thought about all the time. She caught herself wondering if he knew how much she was worried, if he had any idea of the emptiness he had left behind. One afternoon, after a long day of unsuccessful searching, Megan sat on the bench in the park where it all began. The bench was empty, just as it had been in the previous days. But now something felt different. She felt a mix of frustration and sadness, as if she were losing something important, something that couldn't be recovered. The trees around her, which once seemed comforting, now felt heavy and somber, as if the very surroundings were reflecting her pain. She stayed there for a long time, staring at the empty bench, waiting for him to appear, hoping that somehow he would come back. But the hours passed, and once again, nothing happened. She stood up slowly, feeling a weight in her heart that she couldn't shake off. Before leaving, she looked at the bench one last time, as if still expecting to see Jack appear at the corner. But there was no sign of him. In the days that followed, the pain of Jack's absence only grew. Megan tried to occupy her mind with other things, but nothing seemed to work. She kept looking for him, asking around, but no one knew where he was. It was as if Jack were a ghost, someone who had passed through her life and disappeared without a trace. The idea that he might never appear again seemed impossible to accept, but at the same time, it was the reality she was forced to face. She began to wonder if, in some way, she had done something wrong. Had she scared him off by getting so close to him? Had he distanced himself because he no longer wanted to see her? Doubts and uncertainties consumed her. The emptiness Jack had left was too great to ignore. Megan was in a constant state of uncertainty, with her mind torn between hoping to find him and fearing that perhaps he would never return. She knew she couldn't go on like this, that the relentless search for Jack was consuming her life. But she also knew she couldn't just leave him behind. She needed to understand what had happened, needed to know if he was okay. And more than that, she needed to understand what he meant to her. But, as she searched for answers, the emptiness in her chest only grew. Jack's absence made her feel incomplete, lost, as if a part of her had been ripped away. It was then that she began to think that maybe the answer she was looking for was closer than she imagined. What was happening with Jack? What was he hiding? Was it possible that the truth was even more surprising than she had imagined? It was a cold autumn morning when Megan finally decided she could wait no longer. The search for Jack had become an obsession, but reality was cruel. He hadn't returned, and the pain of uncertainty was beginning to turn into a form of resignation. She felt as if she were losing something she didn't fully understand, but that now seemed irreparable. Perhaps he was truly lost forever. Maybe he would never come back, and this was just a bitter lesson life had imposed on her. Megan was trying to convince herself of that, trying to leave behind the hope that consumed her. But as if fate had decided that she still had something to learn, something happened, something Megan would never expect. That morning, as she stepped out of her usual routine and walked to work, something made her stop in the street. She had just passed the park and was heading toward the cafe when she heard the sound of a luxury car parking. The sound of the car door opening and closing, and Megan couldn't help but look back. A strange feeling took hold of her, as if an invisible force was pulling her toward that moment, as if something big was about to happen. She turned slowly, and that's when her eyes locked on him. Jack. But this wasn't the Jack she knew. This wasn't the man in tattered clothes with a scruffy beard and a lost gaze. He was there, but now in a perfectly tailored dark suit, with a serious expression and a firm posture that radiated confidence and authority. He looked like a completely different man, a man who was in full control of his own life. Megan froze. Her mind couldn't process what she was seeing. It was impossible that this man was Jack. She looked again as if hoping something would make sense in her mind, but nothing changed. There he was, standing in front of the park, with a luxury car parked beside him. Megan didn't know what to do. Her mind was torn between surprise and confusion. She recognized him immediately, but the transformation before her was simply unbelievable. She walked toward him, still trying to understand what was happening. Jack. She wasn't sure how to call him. The word felt wrong, but his face, his eyes, his expression were still the same. He looked at her calmly, but this time there was no friendly sparkle or warm smile. There was a coldness in the air, a tension that Megan couldn't decipher. He looked at her with a slight smile but didn't say anything. The silence between them was heavy, as if the air was thick with unspoken words, with hidden secrets. After a moment that felt like an eternity, he finally broke the silence. But the words that came out of his mouth were not what Megan expected. "You look surprised," he said, his voice now sounding more serious than she had ever heard it. There was no longer that soft, calm tone. There was something impersonal in the way he spoke, something distant, as if he wasn't the man she had known, but someone completely different. "I don't understand," Megan stammered, her heart beating out of sync. "Where have you been? What happened? You're not the same." And without hesitation, Jack, or rather, Elias Ward, as he would soon reveal, looked at her and simply replied, "I'm not the same. I never was." Megan couldn't hide the shock on her face. Her words came out without thinking. "But you were on the streets. You were—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The images of Jack sitting in the park with his deep and distant gaze were still fresh in her mind, but now, here he was, standing before her, in a luxury car with a posture that suggested he commanded the world. "I know what you're thinking," he said, interrupting her thoughts. "But the truth is I needed time. I needed to discover who I really am, far from everything that defined me." Megan felt a whirlwind of emotions inside her. The surprise still dominated her, but there was something else there as well, something she couldn't quite identify. She was confused, but something inside her told her that there was more behind those words, more than he was willing to share. "Elias Ward," he finally introduced himself with a smile devoid of emotion. "That's my real name." He paused, and his eyes, which once seemed so distant and full of mystery, were now sharper, firmer. "I'm the heir to a business empire, but I don't want to be part of that anymore." Megan stood silent, her eyes fixed on Elias. His words were beginning to make sense, but the reality he was revealing was too much to process all at once. He was a billionaire? The man she had met on the streets, with that tired and sad look, was now the heir to an unimaginable fortune. She didn't know whether to believe everything he was saying, or if she was just in shock from the situation. Why were you living on the streets?" Megan finally managed to ask, her voice almost a whisper. Elias looked at her for a moment, as if weighing whether or not to reveal more. "I needed to get away from it all. I needed to figure out who I was without the weight of money, without the pressure from my family and business. I didn't want to be seen as a billionaire anymore. I just wanted to be me." Megan felt a mix of confusion and fascination. She knew there was something extraordinary about Elias, but this revelation left her even more perplexed. She never could have imagined that man, that beggar, was actually one of the richest men in the world. But as she tried to process this information, another question began to form in her mind. Why was he revealing himself now? What did he really want? Was there something she still couldn't understand? Elias, now completely different, took a step forward and said, "I know you're confused, Megan, but the truth is, I need something more than money. I need someone who sees me for who I really am, not for the empire I built. I need you." Megan looked at him, trying to understand what he was really saying, but for now the only thing she knew was that the man standing before her was no longer who she thought he was. He wasn't just Jack, he was Elias Ward, and everything she knew about him was about to change. Elias's revelation left Megan stunned. Her mind, which had previously been running a marathon trying to understand what was happening, now felt paralyzed. Jack, the man she had met on the streets, the simple and deep man, now stood before her as Elias Ward, a billionaire, heir to a fortune, and owner of a business empire. How was that possible? How could someone hide a life so different from the one they lived, under the disguise of a beggar? Megan looked at him, trying to process the words he had just spoken. But why? Why live as a beggar? Why hide on the streets when you have everything? You have an empire, a life of luxury. Why choose this? The words came out of her mouth with a tone of disbelief, as if she were questioning whether she was really hearing the truth. Elias watched her with a serious expression, but when he answered, his voice seemed calm, almost distant. "I didn't choose this for pleasure, Megan. I chose this because I needed to find myself. I grew up surrounded by wealth, but I felt empty. I lived an entire life where everything I did was out of obligation, to please my family and meet the expectations always placed on me. But deep down, I didn't know who I really was. The money, the fame, the business, none of it made sense to me. I needed time to discover what it really meant to be me." Megan felt as if Elias's words were hitting an emotional wall she didn't even know she had. She had always known he had something special. But now she understood that this man wasn't just a mysterious figure in the park. He was someone deeply marked by a life full of responsibilities and expectations. She began to wonder if her own life, with all its dreams of escaping the routine, was somehow also surrounded by expectations that weren't hers. "So, you were running away from all of it?" Megan asked, still trying to comprehend the magnitude of the situation. "You walked away from everything you had, everything you are, just to, what? To be a common man? To live as a beggar?" The incredulity in her voice was clear, but there was also a growing curiosity. How could someone who had everything give it all up like that, so drastically? Elias paused, looking at the horizon for a moment, as if lost in the memories that were now resurfacing. "I didn't want to be defined by money, Megan. I wanted to find out who I am, without the weight of being Elias Ward, the billionaire, without the pressure of being the heir to a fortune I didn't build. I wanted to understand what life was about, what it really meant for someone like me." Megan, now more attentive than ever, began to feel an empathy for him that she hadn't imagined she could feel. She, who had always struggled to survive in her own world of financial difficulties, was beginning to realize that, despite Elias having a fortune at his disposal, he too carried his own burden, a burden that was invisible but deeply painful. His life seemed like a golden prison, full of obligations he hadn't chosen, full of expectations that weren't his. Elias, seeing the understanding in Megan's eyes, continued, "I distanced myself from everything, not because I wanted to live as a beggar, but because I wanted the chance to experience life without being judged for what I had. I wanted to be seen for who I really am, not for what I have or what I can do for others." He paused, his eyes fixed on her. "I never imagined I would fall in love with someone during this time. I never imagined life would give me someone like you." Megan felt a wave of emotion wash over her. It was as if the very weight of her confusion had dissipated, and now she was starting to understand Elias's journey in a deeper way. He wasn't just running away from luxury, money, and family. He was trying to escape a life that wasn't his, in search of something that would make him feel alive again. He wanted something more, something genuine, something real. "I understand," she said softly, unsure of what else to say. "You were trying to find yourself." Elias nodded slowly, a faint smile forming on his lips. "Exactly. I didn't want to be the heir to an empire. I didn't want to be the man everyone saw as the perfect billionaire. I wanted to be the man who could live without fear of being who I really am. I just didn't know where this journey would take me." Megan took a deep breath, still processing everything he had said. She was beginning to see Elias in a new light. The man she had met in the park with his worn appearance and sad eyes now seemed to be someone completely different. But at the same time, she felt that his essence, the deep, reflective, wise man, had always been there, even behind the disguise of a beggar. "But why didn't you tell me all of this before?" Megan asked, now more curious than ever. "Why hide, Elias? Why not speak the truth?" Elias looked at her with a serious expression, as if the question were more complex than she imagined. "Because the truth is hard to accept, Megan. And I didn't know if you would accept me. I didn't know if you would see me for who I really am, or if you would just see my wealth and my past." Megan looked at him, her eyes now full of understanding. She finally understood the pain he carried, the internal battle that drove him to hide behind a facade. She saw him now, not just as Jack, the beggar, but as Elias Ward, a man who was trying, at great cost, to find real meaning in his life. "I see you, Elias," Megan said, her voice soft but firm. "I see you for who you are, not for what you have." Megan's words touched Elias in a way he hadn't anticipated. It was as if, suddenly, everything had made sense to him. He didn't need to hide who he was anymore. Megan accepted him. And in that moment, he felt that maybe, at last, he had found what he was looking for, a place where he could truly be himself. After Elias's revelation, Megan's words still echoed in his mind. "I see you, Elias. I see you for who you are, not for what you have." That simple yet deeply meaningful phrase seemed to touch something profound within him. He had spent his entire life hiding behind a facade, trying to distance himself from the pain and responsibilities his name and fortune imposed. But now, with Megan, he felt that maybe, finally, he could be true to himself. But as always, truth came with a price. That price was his past, the weight of guilt he carried. And in that moment, Elias knew he could no longer hide from everything that had driven him away from the world he once knew. He needed to tell Megan. He needed to share with her the pain he had kept hidden for so long. Megan noticed that something was still incomplete. She had seen a part of Elias, the part he wanted to show, but she felt there was something more. Something he wasn't revealing. He seemed like a man torn, someone carrying an internal battle, but who still hadn't freed himself from all his demons. That day, after a few moments of silence between them, Elias finally broke the quiet, looking at Megan with an expression filled with regret. "Do you want to know where the pain I carry comes from, Megan?" he asked, his voice filled with emotion, but also a deep sadness she hadn't seen before. She looked at him attentively, realizing she was about to discover something that would change the way she saw him. "I was responsible for something that destroyed lives, something that haunts me to this day, something I could never forget." Elias paused, and Megan felt that he was weighing his words carefully. The tone of his voice, once firm and determined, now sounded broken, as if he were allowing himself for the first time to speak about something that had been chasing him for years. "I was in charge of a construction project. It was one of my father's biggest works, a project that was being seen as a symbol of our empire. A project that was supposed to define the future of our family and our company. But something went wrong." Megan watched him attentively, her heart racing. She knew this was important. She knew that this story, more than anything, was what defined Elias. What had led him to abandon his life of luxury and hide on the streets. She felt this was the key to understanding his complexity. What motivated him. What made him who he was. It was a day like any other, Elias continued, his voice now quieter, as if he were reliving the moment in his mind. We were close to finishing the project. It was a huge building, a commercial center that was going to be the biggest in the city. But something happened. Something that should never have happened. Elias closed his eyes for a moment as if trying to block out the images of that day that still haunted him. Megan noticed he was trying to find the right words to describe what had happened. The pain he felt was visible, almost palpable. One of the workers, he made a mistake. A simple mistake, but one that had tragic consequences. The building's structure, at a certain point, wasn't secure. It was a mistake that should have been detected during the inspection. But it wasn't. When the structure collapsed, 2 men died that day. Megan felt a tightening in her chest as she heard Elias's words. She imagined the weight of it for him, the guilt he carried for something that seemed so out of his control, but still tied to him, as if fate had entwined their lives in a way he couldn't escape. The tragedy, the pain, the loss, all of it was part of his story, his past. I was the one responsible. I was the project leader. I should have checked everything. I should have made sure nothing went wrong. And in the end, 2 men died, and their families lost everything. I saw them in the newspapers, saw the pain on their wives' faces, on their children's faces, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to deal with it. Megan felt a wave of compassion for Elias, but also a deep sadness. She never imagined the man standing before her, the one who seemed so strong and secure, had carried such a great and heavy pain. He was broken, but still couldn't free himself from the weight of his guilt. That's when I decided to leave, he said, his voice trembling. I couldn't live with it anymore. I couldn't carry the weight of being Elias Ward, the heir to an empire, while knowing something so terrible happened under my watch. I left. I abandoned everything. I went to the streets, where no one knew who I was. And there, I tried to find something that would bring me peace. But so far I haven't found it. Megan looked at him with a mixture of empathy and understanding. She knew that Elias wasn't just running away from his wealth, he was running away from himself, from the guilt that consumed him. He had distanced himself from everyone and everything in a desperate attempt to find some relief for his pain. You can't carry this forever, Elias, Megan said softly, but with firmness in her voice. You did something tragic, but you can't let it define your life forever. You deserve to find a way to heal, to move forward. Elias looked at her with a gaze filled with a mixture of gratitude and pain. I know, Megan, but I don't know how. I don't know if I can. She moved closer to him, gently placing her hand over his. You don't have to do this alone. I'm here, Elias, and you can tell me anything. I'll listen. But you have to stop blaming yourself. You deserve to be happy. Elias looked at her, his eyes filled with silent gratitude, but also a deep fear that the pain would never go away. Deep down, he knew that to move forward, he would need to face his past. But what he didn't know was if he was ready for it. However, what Megan was offering him was something he never imagined he would find. Someone who accepted him, not for his failures, but for his qualities. Someone who believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. That moment of vulnerability, that moment of honesty, was the turning point for Elias. He knew that with Megan by his side, there might finally be a chance to begin again. But the path ahead was still uncertain. The afternoon was beginning to fade, and the sun hid behind a cloudy horizon when Megan and Elias started walking through the quiet streets of the city. They had moved away from the park, but the tension between them still lingered in the air. Elias, despite opening up in a way he never had before, still carried the shadow of his past. Megan knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was willing to stay by his side, to help him find the peace he had been searching for. The silence between them was comfortable, a necessary pause to process everything they had shared. But when they reached the corner of the street, the peace that seemed to reign was shattered by a sharp female voice full of bitterness. Elias! The word hit Megan like a punch to the stomach. She turned quickly to see a woman approaching them, her expression full of disdain. She was tall, imposing, and her eyes shot a look of reproach directly at Elias. It was clear that she was important to him, but the tone of her voice, the coldness with which she addressed him, suggested that their relationship wasn't exactly friendly. The woman stopped a few feet from Elias and Megan. Her eyes first fixed on Elias, then moved to Megan with a subtle critique in every movement. She approached him without hesitation, and her words came out with a tone of superiority. "You really have the audacity to show up here after everything you've done?" And with her, of course, as if nothing had happened. Megan looked at Elias, feeling a wave of discomfort. Who was this woman? Why was she speaking to Elias like that? Elias, for his part, seemed tense, his shoulders stiff, but he didn't speak immediately. The woman, noticing his lack of reaction, turned completely toward him. "You just disappeared, Elias, and now you show up again after years after ruining our family and the business, and now you come with this woman?" She looked at Megan with evident contempt, as though she were an outsider in his life. "You know what you did, don't you? You hid, threw everything away, and now you show up again as if nothing happened. I can't believe you have the nerve to do this after everything." Megan stood silent, not understanding what was going on. She looked at Elias, hoping he would speak, but he didn't immediately. The pain on his face was clear, and she could see that those words were hitting him hard. "I already know what you think of me, Ava," Elias finally said, his voice low and controlled but filled with a palpable tension. "I don't need your approval. I know what I did, but I also know what I need to do now. And that doesn't involve our company or your business. I'm trying to find a way to move forward, Ava. You can't understand that." Ava laughed bitterly. "Move forward? Really? You just threw it all away. You threw away our family, the empire we built, and you hid on the streets. And now you're here wanting to move forward. You destroyed everything, Elias. All the work of our family, everything we built for generations. You threw it away for nothing." Megan felt the weight of Ava's words and saw how much it hurt Elias. She didn't know exactly what had happened between them, but she couldn't deny that Ava's words were having a profound impact on him. The pain on his face was unmistakable. Megan felt helpless, as though she were witnessing a confrontation she couldn't fully understand, but knew was crucial for Elias's future and for the relationship that was beginning to grow between them. Ava continued, her voice now stronger, as if she were on a mission to expose all the accumulated anger. "You don't think about the consequences of your actions, Elias. And now, you show up with her, with a woman who has no idea what you've done. She has no idea how you destroyed our family. She doesn't know what you put us through." For the first time, Elias seemed to lose his patience. "I know what I did, Ava, and I know what you think of me, but that doesn't change what I feel or what I want now. It's not about business, it's not about our family or what you and Dad think of me. I just want to live my life. And if that bothers you, I'm sorry, but I can't keep living the way you want me to." Ava, furious, took a step forward, glaring at Elias with a cold stare. "You'll never change. You'll live running away forever, hiding from the truth. But you'll never find peace, Elias. You'll never be who you really are, not with this woman here. You're just fooling yourself and her too. The truth is going to end all of this, both of you." Megan felt a wave of frustration and helplessness. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but Ava's words were creating a growing distance between her and Elias. She wanted to help. She wanted to understand what was going on, but it seemed like the scars between Elias and his family were too deep to be easily healed. She looked at Elias, trying to understand what he was feeling. He was shaken, but didn't seem willing to give in to his sister's pressure. It was as though the tension between them had reached a point of no return. Megan knew she too had to make a decision. What would she do now? Would she get more involved in this family struggle, or should she step back to protect her own heart? Elias looked at Megan, as if finally realizing her presence by his side. His eyes softened, but the weight of Ava's words still hung in the air. "I need you, Megan," Elias said with a tone that, though firm, was filled with a vulnerability he rarely showed. "But I also know you don't deserve to carry the weight of my family life. I just hope that somehow you understand me. I know you're facing a dilemma, but I can't change what happened." Megan looked at him, and a wave of understanding hit her. She knew the situation was complicated, but she was willing to stand by him, to support his choices. Because, in the end, she saw him not as the billionaire or the businessman, but as Elias, the man she was beginning to love. But she also knew that things wouldn't be easy. The final decision would be hers: stay with Elias despite all the complications, or walk away and let his past come between them. It wasn't an easy choice, but she knew that the real journey was just beginning. Thank you so much for watching this story until the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to leave a like. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next ones. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think about the choices made by the characters? Do you agree with how things unfolded, or would you have done something different? Drop your opinion in the comments below,